He adopted a child, but while bathing, he saw a mole and immediately went to return the orphan. This sad story originates from Russia, a country full of orphans. Our protagonist, Liba, began to encounter problems when it came to getting pregnant and conceiving the child she had always wanted. Her story until then was full of achievements and a lot of self improvements. But still, the woman had exceeded her expectations and she was ready to consolidate a beautiful family. Her husband, Yuri, couldn't agree more. They bought a new house for their family near Moscow, and it had a large garden for their children to play. But as much as they tried, the gestation of their first child didn't take place. But even so, Luiba did not become pregnant, and therefore the much desired child of hers was an increasingly remote possibility. Once the traditional way was ruled out, they decided to ask about in vitro insemination, a technique that was becoming more common at that time and offered better and better results. That's why they both chose to go to the corresponding specialists, where they carefully explained all the details, the procedure, and the way in which it would be carried out. But Luiba was unconvinced and confused. Her husband explained that it was a very important step in her life, that if she wasn't 100% sure, it was best not to force it and find another alternative. Those were the words she needed to hear. So they thanked the medical team and left the clinic, making it clear that this procedure was not what they were looking for. But she still wanted to be a mother, and until now the conception seemed to be still very far away, to the point of believing that one of the two could be sterile, which would explain how she had not gotten pregnant up until now. The next thing on the list was adoption, a process that was much less invasive, since she didn't have to be or give birth to the child, so it added many points in favor. Louisa agreed to go to an orphanage to see if they could find a girl who met their expectations. Her husband looked in amazement and asked, "A girl?" As she explained to him that yes, as she did have to the opportunity to choose. In this way, they traveled to an orphanage where they were received with great joy. Unfortunately, there are more and more orphans than parents willing to adopt, so they're always welcoming all the couples who thought of taking that important step. The teacher quickly understood what they needed and took them to the nursery where the children had to learn how to socialize and play with other children. At that time, the teacher carefully explained which ones were the girls, since everyone in the place was mixed up. She also explained to her which ones were the happiest, the funniest, which ones ate better, and some characteristics of each one so that they could choose more at ease. But she had stopped listening to her. She was no longer interested in any of the girls, but in a little boy who was watching her from a corner. He was a very particular child, even physically, he was similar to them, so she could say without any problem that he really was a biological son. That's how she simply told her, "That's the child I want." Her husband was surprised and asked if they were not looking for a girl, but she insisted and he gave in to her desire. The orphanage teacher was very surprised at how quickly she changed her mind, but at the same time, she was glad that she had chosen so quickly. Many parents come in asking 1,000 questions and then leave empty handed, which is very frustrating. After that, they put the child away and went to the administration to complete the corresponding paperwork while the teacher told them the details. It was about a boy who had arrived very recently. They found him abandoned, and for the first few weeks he couldn't sleep, since he had nightmares at night. But after that time, he had managed to adapt perfectly to the place. After a bit of red tape, they simply took him into the vehicle and drove to their new home. The house had never been so full of life before. The boy walked through the spaces and had fun, something very atypical for a newcomer, and that made his new parents very happy, who did not imagine that they would have to return him in just a few weeks. The truth is that when she was bathing him, she discovered a strange spot on his shoulder blade, a birthmark that was very strange and familiar, as if she'd seen it before. She tried to think with great energy where she'd seen that birthmark, and that was when she realized her friend from college had a son with a mole that met the same characteristics. She had even told her about her son's blemish, whose mole was diamond shaped. The idea that this was her son did not let her sleep. The boy had the same characteristics, but she didn't know anything about her friend. She couldn't call her and just ask if her child was missing. That's how she explained to her husband that she couldn't live with that intrigue. If that child was her friend's child, she couldn't just ignore the situation, so she went looking for her. She called the university and asked for her information, which, after explaining the situation, they gave it to her immediately and without asking any further questions. When she finally found her, they shared coffee and talked about their life. It was there that she told Louisa that her husband had gone out with his lover, when, in an oversight, she had lost her son. Their son simply lost in an oversight while he was with his lover. At that moment, Louisa's pulse rate increased. there couldn't be so many coincidences together. But she didn't tell her at the time. Instead, she waited to be sure. That's why she saved the gum she was chewing and her glass of water to do the corresponding DNA tests. But when the results came back from Moscow, they only served to confirm what she had already known. Her son was actually her friend's son, and she had to tell her. That's why they called a psychologist who will help them communicate the news in the best possible way. Well, her husband was in charge of carrying out the procedures to disassociate themselves from their son. He was going to be sorely missed, but it was the right thing to do. Although they say that whoever does things well often gets a reward. And that was what happened, since after returning the boy to the orphanage, Louisa became pregnant and she was able to fulfill her dream of having her first child, while her friend enjoyed the miracle of having found her only son again.